what's the world that we live in these days? There are incredible, gnarly issues out there in the world. And I think there's one word with which you can summarize those issues that we're navigating. It's instability. All of them are control issues. And the shifts in these will ultimately result in where power resides. And I think that shift of power and the role that control will have is super interesting, and it is what will probably define a lot of the thinking and a lot of the doing over the next 1 to 3 years.
My name is Christine Baun, and I am thrilled to welcome Thomas Mueller to ArtCenter. Thomas is a grad of our MDP, Media Design Practices program. I think back when you graduated, Thomas, it was new media or digital media?
Correct.
Okay. And Thomas is currently the Chief Design Officer for Accenture Song Europe. Thomas, for the past 20 years, and I thought this was really lovely, so I'm going to just read it. Thomas has helped agency design and innovation teams bring creativity, simplicity, elegance, and rigor to their practice. Thomas loves using design as a process to unlock value, understand people, integrate technology, create emotional connection, and enable magical experiences. Prior to joining Accenture Song and Fjord, Thomas served as Chief Experience Officer at Siegel & Gale, also worked at Arnold Worldwide, and a longtime employee of Razorfish with a lot of our other awesome alumni. So it's my pleasure to welcome Thomas Mueller. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine, for this warm welcome. We needed a warm welcome with this weather out there. My God, I can't even tell you, like it says future on here, but I should have worn the other jumper with the big heart on here because it's just jumping out of me. I'm so happy to be back. Every time I speak with Christine or with Karen, online or in person, I always remind them, these introductions, they make me uncomfortable, I'll be very honest. Everything I do, which is really everything all of the designers with me do, I believe in the concept of servant leadership. I work for 1,200 designers across Europe. Stems from this place. That's where it all began for me. So every time I get to come here, it's just an incredible privilege. And it's nice to see so many familiar faces here in the room. So the last couple of years, when I still talked about Fjord trends, we did this online. In 2020 was the last time here in person. So I'm thrilled to be back to, again, share with you what is now called Accenture Live Trends. But before I jump into that, I think it requires to set a little bit context. Who do I represent? What's the organization behind Live Trends? So some of you may know Accenture. You may have heard about this force of an unbelievable 700,000 people. I always shake when I hear that number. 700,000 people across the world that, focus on technology, focus on digital transformation, and bring a lot of consulting experience across so many industries to clients. But at the same time, there's this other team within Accenture called Accenture Song, which is, we believe, so much more than that and a bit different. And that's who I work with. So it's about 50,000 creatives, strategists, technologists, and designers who get to work with some of the most interesting, some of the most difficult and challenging companies around the world. We have this global footprint, which is just fascinating. And of course, we're proud of the fact that trade press and especially analysts like Forrester and others think we do a decent job. It's been a long road. It's been more than 10 years building up this team, both organically and inorganically. It's a fancy word for convincing people that they should join this movement. A lot of them have. In 2013, this small dot here, Fjord, was the first real design organization that joined Accenture Song. And 10 years later, we're known as Accenture Song. I believe in simplicity. At some point, this previous chart just became a mess. It was impossible to manage, and it required a big cultural journey to actually bring all of these people from this previous chart that everybody joined for a particular reason, that particular dot on the map, into what we are now. The chairman of Accenture Song is a lovely Australian called David Droga. Some of you might know him. David, I got to spend, it was week before last, we spent 4 hours with him in New York to really do a deep dive on the potential and the power of design and the team that he has as part of this crew of 50,000, in his stable. So the designers at Song, we at the end of the day, we love to make things that people love to have in their life. Humanize technology, lead with simplicity, envision a better future. The design team overall is 2,500 amazing colleagues, wonderful, wonderful talent across these 60 and plus studios. And at the end of the day, we always start with, there's no point in doing work unless we really go deep on understanding human insights, extracting those, combining them with creativity and with our imagination to solve some of the world's often most challenging problems. We, of course, love when that gets recognized. I'm particularly proud of, it's funny that there's two banks here in the middle. Minna Bank, some phenomenal work by our team in Japan, which has designed and built a digital bank. It's a cloud-based bank. And as you can see, some of even just those small images on here, who has seen a bank interface like this? It's completely unusual, I think, for our part of the world. It is doing incredibly well. On the other hand, you have an example of Italy, Intesa San Paolo, taking their sort of like stab into what could a super app be, and no less than Forrester Research has actually given it the label of the world's best banking app. So a huge variety of work, and I'm going to just leave you with that, with just a tiny little clip, because this team that does this work is the same team around the world who actually is completely focused on the signals out there in the world which become the basis of the trends report. So this is just a small snapshot from Europe, and it's obviously a lot of work that's out in the world. But the reason why I wanted to just spend 5 minutes up front on this is, it said in this last film, a team of thinkers and makers. They make, and there's a lot of thinking, obviously, that goes into this work. And the same thinking is that actually goes into this. So Accenture Life Trends, which were formerly known as Fjord Trends, is a tradition now in its 15th year. And that in itself, I think, is an incredible focus, and it requires discipline to stick with it. So what do we do in the process of putting this content together? Every year in the summer, usually around August, we reach out to all of those studios around the world, and we ask them very simple question. What are the signals that you're seeing in humanity, in business, and technology? That's the simple brief from Singapore to Helsinki, to Sao Paulo, to Los Angeles, to Seattle, to Munich, where I now live, that every team gets. So 2,500 people around the world spend time on this, and eventually, in a pretty rigorous schedule, they bring this content back. Every signal, the themes that people with this global coverage see, comes back to us, comes back to a small team. That team collects all of that input. That team starts to do pattern recognition in order to put it ultimately together. And the art or science, both of it, of putting it together, is especially finding an articulation, a meaningful articulation of what we are seeing, usually with a focus of 1 to no more than 5 years out. And the interesting thing usually is when we present this to clients, when I talk about it in a setting like this, people often say, you know, I had kind of a sense for that. I knew this, but I didn't have the words. I couldn't put sort of like a theme on it. This report either gives me something entirely new, or it actually gives me language to refer to these themes. So control and power is the meta theme that started to emerge pretty quickly, the red thread that holds everything together. Out of these signals from 60+ studios, it boiled down to about 5 to 6 trends, and control and power is the meta theme. Now, you might ask why. Well, what's the world that we live in these days? There are incredible, gnarly issues out there in the world. And I think there's one word with which you can summarize those issues that all of you, thank you, by the way, for weathering the storm, the Southern California snowmageddon and coming in, that we're navigating. It's instability. And what does this instability do to us, right? It worries people. Instability is not comfortable. Everybody is quick to say, I love change, but deep inside, who actually is really thrilled every day navigating instability or loving change? It creates a lot of anxiety in the world. And a lot of people in this sense of instability and anxiety are trying to ultimately understand, what is it that they can control? What is it that actually remains in my sphere of influence right now? And then certainly the last 4 weeks have been just a nonstop, either exciting or intimidating barrage of news out of high-tech media around the next wave of technology that is just maturing, and it is leading maybe to a shift in power, which could maybe be really interesting, because this desire to regain control over a planet that seems filled with instability, that fills people with anxiety, might be something just that we need, as our lives really have been less than stable for the last 3 to 4 years. So with that background and this issue around control and power, these are the 5 2023 trends. For those of you who've heard me online or in person present those in the past, You probably also remember that 15 years in a row, it's both about the content and, of course, it's about the presentation. And every year, aside from an overall meta theme that holds the story, that holds the content together, we also are always looking for, what's the visual idea? What's the concept that allows us to put all of this together? And I'm just curious here in the room, without me even talking about the imagery that you see. Do you see what's going on here? Of course, Christo, help us out. Thank you. So it just made sense that, given also the content of this year's report, the graphic design team that was working on this really became a team turning content, and turning concepts into prompts, and designing with Midjourney as a tool to pull this year's report together. And I'll get to that in trend number 4. The other tradition that we've had for 15 years, all of us are music nerds. We always, for so many years, we're looking also for every trend. What would be a great music title, a musical reference that we could pull for this trend? Well, for 14 years, it was always fun. It didn't necessarily make sense. When we became Accenture Song, we said, wow, finally, this also makes sense. So just to warm this room up on this cold February night in California, I'm sure Chris can help me out a second time. I Will Survive by... Uh-oh, he's too young.
I can hear the song on my...
Thank you, thank you. I'm a Believer. Amazing. As It Was. Come on, somebody young. Harry Styles. Okay, we had to cheat. It's Tom York and Accenture. We were like, oh, we don't quite know how we'll bring those two together. It became OK Creativity, Tom York, Radiohead, and Signed, Sealed, and Delivered. Wonderful. So it was the first year that song titles actually also made sense. So let's jump in. Gloria Gaynor. My God, I wish I would have had the music in the background. So I'll open with I Will Survive. Again, the background here is things are rough. And they've been complex and rough for a while. And that sort of like complexity really has had an inevitable impact on people's choices and on people's attitudes. Collins Dictionary's word of the year 2022 was Perma Crisis. And about 2-3 weeks, what was the word that came out of Davos in the Swiss Alps at the World Economic Forum? Polycrisis. Perma crisis, polycrisis. I personally think it's probably a different perspective on the same general condition. At the World Economic Forum, who comes together? World leaders, global CEOs, and their lives, much like ours, have really been turned upside down. Many conflicting things, crises, situations happening in parallel at the same time, making their jobs, as much as our simple lives, rather uncomfortable and rather complex to navigate. But then at the same time, it's also easy for us. We're sitting here in a warm auditorium to lament about crisis. You all, hopefully, and your families made it relatively well through the last 3 years. But there's so many parts in the world for which and for whom crisis is nothing new. If I think, about sub-Saharan Africa, a permanent crisis is a permanent state for them. For us, North America, Europe, other parts, it's been rather destabilizing because we have not been used to navigating these kinds of situations. Places that are in a perma-crisis, what do? They actually, like it or not, they manage to adopt another place that comes to mind in that context would be a country like Afghanistan. For decades, they've been navigating crisis and they've been adapting to crisis. So we, for the most part, I hope you have been blessed with an incredible long period of time of stability. And that stability, while it was wonderful, it certainly didn't prepare us for a state of perma crisis. Now, I don't really need to go through this list of events. You all lived through the pandemic. You know, February 2020 was the last time I was able to travel this far and also share trends. Right now, we're coming up to the one-year anniversary of the Ukraine war, which obviously is not just a place very far away from Southern California. It's had a systemic impact around the world, and it's part of this continuous, accentuated permacrisis, and you especially feel it living in Europe. But then the next topic, obviously, is also the cost of living crisis, inflation. We did the math last week, again, just to be sure. You'd have to be 53 or older in Europe or North America to really have experienced inflation above 4%. Severe weather events, thank you for the skies to just help me out on that one tonight. Europe is no longer immune to this. We've had our share of heat waves. We've had our share of fires. Of course, these are events that you in Southern California have always been used to, but also here, what's different is the speed at which they seem to be coming at us, the consistency at which these weather events are starting to come at us. It's another element of this permacrisis. So with this state, what we've noticed is, you know, there's basically four responses that people are finding to adapt. The first one is fight. And fight is essentially people will raise their voices against injustice. Across Europe, again, a place where I'm coming from in these days, I look to the UK, they haven't stopped being on strike for months. Germany, we've had strikes for the last couple of weeks, be it the postal service, be it all airports. Last week Friday, there was no airplane in the skies above Germany because all airports were essentially shut down by strike, by people raising their voice against either injustice, or in their case, it's as simple as, you know, how the hell am I going to live with a flat salary, but, you know, inflation for essentials is running at 30 to 40%. That's the fight. And bear in mind that inflation hits people at the bottom of the economic or salary scale much worse because the percent of their basket affected when it comes to just even essentials like food or energy is going up fast. And this fight is not just noticed in the general public, but it will also increasingly catch actually brands by surprise. The second response that we're seeing is flight. People looking for an alternative option, often for different places to live. Now, flight and people changing the places where they live is nothing new. It really started, however, to pick up during COVID. It's glad to see so many of you here. But many have left places. Many have left cities that weren't functioning anymore. And that theme, however, has also continued. Families who are simply seeking to make ends meet are cutting back on non-essentials like media, subscriptions, a phenomenon that now has also been referred to as the Great Cancellation. People are canceling, you know, their gym memberships. People are canceling their contributions to pensions. People are canceling their insurance policies. People are even canceling participating in social activities. That's the notion of flight. Focus. People are trying to cope by actually focusing on the things that they can control. Goes back to the meta theme. Coping by focusing. And how do some people do that? Well, they simply start to reduce their sphere both physically and increasingly also virtually. They're quieting out the noise, rejecting sort of like this global first version of this perfect life that we're supposed to live, promoted by online news and social media. Now, digitally in particular, this focus is very much seen by people shifting from major influencers to micro or to niche influencers. A huge shift from the big social media platforms to niche platforms. Why? Because often what starts to appear there is you're starting to rediscover the things that many years ago, when those platforms started to rise, what they offered. It was a sense of belonging, it was a sense of community, it was a sense of trust, and it was a greater sense of purpose. Some of those platforms that are people shifting to are actually not necessarily smaller. I'll get to that in a second, but they are much, much more focused. And then the fourth response that we're seeing is freeze. It's people just simply powering down. The best verbiage around this last year has been quiet quitting. Quiet quitting, sort of like this emotional power down to economy mode. I'm just going to freeze. I'm going to go into economy mode. And we're hearing the signal, again, these 62 studios, 2,500 people, that's incredible signal spotting. That's coming from all over the world. Maybe one of the most pronounced versions is what we've picked up in China with a movement called Bai Lan, which translates to, anybody will help me out? Apparently translates to let it rot. And it's young people's refusal in China to essentially invest effort in life because it just simply seems futile. Like, why would I? I don't see where this is going right now. Now, when you translate sort of like this notion of freeze also to brands, brands again need to be super, super careful, because people who are displaying these four responses will also approach brands increasingly with so much more caution than before. Because why would I go after a brand where I sense enough signals that I'll either be disappointed or I'll be betrayed? So, interesting four responses. Now, this matters in my mind in two ways. When we think about music, art and culture, it always brings vitality into society when the energy is running incredibly low. If we just go back through history and look at periods that were culturally advanced, we saw a revolution, we saw an explosion of creativity. That's typically happening at the exact same time when the world, or certain parts of the world, were incredibly unstable. And you know, maybe we have that exact same compressed sense of instability right now, and we tend to think, of course, trend forecasting is a hard job, is a hard thing to do. It's a bit of a guess, but the conditions might just be right at this time for something new culturally that will change people's outlook and hopefully, no pun intended, will actually bring hope. And then the second thing why this matters, you may like it or not, we live in this world where we interact with brands. And as brands, at the end of the day, exist entirely in a cultural context, it'll be really, really important for those brands to be in tune with these signals and be able to react in a very fast and relevant way. So that's the first one. The second trend is called I'm a Believer. And this trend centers around belonging and how people are finding belonging online now in new places. And when we talk about new places online that people are going to, remember I talked about this shift earlier, large influencers, large platforms, niche platforms. Of course, brands have always followed people in order to stay in tune with what pop culture is. So if brands are following people to these new places online, that obviously raises immediately another interesting and also lucrative question. What's next for brands and what's next for customer loyalty? So if I go back, and I'm going to go back again a few years, just a couple of years in time, remember the months starting after March 2020 during the pandemic when, the world powered down, when a lot of us, went into isolation at home. What happened at the same time anywhere in the world was this incredible rise of new hobbies, of niche hobbies, people who were, diehard, I have a kitchen, it's my storage space, started to cook. People who don't have a garden started to garden in their kitchen. Closet organization. I mean, a plethora of niche hobbies that just came to the forefront. Well, this actually hasn't stopped since then. This incredible rise of niche hobbies has continued, and it's moved to our digital lives and incredibly into virtual spaces. People are seeking places with a greater sense of belonging, where there is finally, again, a focus on new hobbies, community, meaning, and digital groups where you actually can go really, really deep and explore on your own and with that community a lot of these newfound interests. But then at the same time, when you look broadly at this phenomenon online, what we found is, well, it's not all that surprising because social media at large isn't that social anymore as it used to be when that first wave started to rise. And why? It's the impact a lot of how the platforms have become smarter. The impact of artificial intelligence has had that amazing impact of, automation, more precision. The content is just so perfect that a lot of these places are starting to feel a little bit more cold. That sense of community, that sense of serendipity, that sense of belonging that we used to initially seek out there seems to have gone missing. But it hasn't gone missing. It's actually moved to new places. So Chris mentioned Midjourney earlier. I'll get to it in a second, but many of you probably know it. You experience it, you use it through Discord, one of those new places where a lot of people have navigated to. 6.7, close to 7 million servers part of Discord. Every single one of these servers is devoted to a topic, a niche hobby, and an entire community that rallies around that. All visuals in this report were done by designers with a lot of imagination, using that tool to generate, with the assistance of artificial intelligence, this imagery. Other places that people have moved to, left the old places, and really have brought an entire wave of new life into Reddit. Reddit has 50 million daily active users. That's not a small amount by any means. And why are people going there again? Because Reddit is organized into subreddits, and for every niche topic, for every niche passion that you have, you'll find your people, you'll find the answers to the questions, or those interested in listening to you. So then, with sort of like this move to these new communities, you add and you enter Web3 and everything around tokenization and what that is enabling these communities to do, where these communities are anchored on a real mission and a really, really strong sense of belonging. Because these communities, they include purpose, they include causes, they focus on new crafts, on new tools, and they finally give this exclusivity, sometimes with gated access to either special content or special experiences. Sort of like that more communal, protected, experience that people have started to miss. And of course, again, I'll pick up a theme from earlier, brands are starting to experiment. Why? Because loyalty is essentially the future of any brand. A loyal customer is a much more profitable customer, is a better ambassador to my brand than the new customer I need to acquire over and over again. So brands are following this trend offered and enabled through Web3 and tokenization. Brands are following their people onto these spaces. You look to Adidas, they've done in a very, very short period of time really, really interesting things in the metaverse, in a token-gated community where you get to experience Adidas content, Adidas digital services and products, if you connect your digital wallet to the Discord server. Why? Because they are experimenting with how do I strengthen or replace loyalty that I'm at risk of losing in other places. Token gating, creating a sense of exclusivity, is really rising in its popularity in fashion and in sports, and it's gaining momentum far beyond that. Another brand that really has gone far out is Lacoste. They launched more than 11,000 NFTs paying tribute to the iconic L12 polo shirt when one of our design teams in Europe 2 holiday seasons ago launched 48 NFT ugly sweaters. We were super thrilled, but going to 11,000, that's an entire different game. Now, we also see an exponential rise of digital collectibles, the full gamut from art, autographs, trading cards, brand catalogs, but also important moments in news, in history, in sports. Again, another sports brand, Nike, has issued virtual sneakers as collectibles as a result of their acquisition of Retrofact. And then I mentioned earlier the World Economic Forum in Davos. We, together with Microsoft, built the metaverse, the global collaboration village for that entire event, really to offer a parallel experience around a certain moment in time, which since then obviously has a much, much longer lifespan. So in essence, what we're seeing with this trend is that there's a real possibility for a shift around relationships, for new forms of participation between brands and customers. Because the old approach to loyalty, which too often in the mass market is still focused on concepts like offering discounts, or if I think about airlines incentivizing you to collect points, most of the times the discounts are hard to get because the principle of scarcity is in place, and there's too many lockout dates to really put your airline points to use. It's increasingly not attractive, and especially with younger audiences. So the big question really is, how much control should brands divest in exchange for loyalty, or how much is the concept of really belonging worth? And that's kind of like the essence of the second trend. Now the third one, Harry Styles, is going to take us to this notion of as it was. Is it a bit romantic? Is it a walk back in history? Well, it really deals with the return to the office or the return to campus. Again, it's been probably complex. It's been probably handled incredibly well. But even with the best intentions, I'm sure the return to the office and the return to campus is not exactly how you planned it and how you imagined it. And what we are seeing, that is universally true. For most people and for most businesses, it's not as it was. And everybody is trying to solve what should it be. The head of the UK Employers Federation was stated to have said only a couple of weeks ago, hybrid working is not working. Now, we could interpret that in different ways. People are working hybrid, are not working. Hybrid working is not working. CEOs, a lot of CEOs are privately saying, I wish I could just get all of my people back into the office. Our global CEO, Julie Sweet, in January, the first call of the year with all of the managing directors around the world, she was pretty clear. She didn't demand, but she said the sense is I need all of you to be back with your teams. Your teams, we're getting so much signal that I need you to be back with your teams. And equally as important, I need you to be back with your clients, because everything that happens in real life is impossible. Too much of it is impossible to recreate in this hybrid approach that we've taken for the last couple of years. So I look at myself pretty much since late summer of last year. I've started to just force myself because I was missing my teams. I was missing the interaction with clients to find out what is my future like. What would it be to either go back to as it was or what it should be? And it's an intentional change to a work schedule that Mondays are usually planning days in the way we work, and a lot of it is focused on either across Europe or on specific projects to really look at what's the stuff we have to get done, where's thinking time, where's doing time just for the week. But Tuesdays through Thursdays, often Tuesdays through Fridays, are back with teams and are back with clients. Why with teams? Because at the end of the day, we are humans. And as much as technology has gotten incredible intonation, body language, the spark that happens when teams are in a room or on a whiteboard, it just doesn't happen at the same speed virtually. And when I'm with my clients and they say, let's go grab a coffee, let's go grab lunch together, well, what usually happens in those settings, we talk, we share, I get to hear where their next challenges are, and that's usually where work also comes from. And around the world, we are seeing this is the biggest push right now. Designers, creatives, consultants are trying to be with their clients again to imagine the next chapter, to imagine better futures. And those who are there are usually a step ahead. And those who are continuing to work remotely are at the risk of being a step or two or three behind. Now, clearly, it's an incredibly hot issue. It's a very difficult issue, and everyone has a very different reaction to it. But as the debate continues, one thing still remains clear. For many, many people, return to work is not quite a success yet. And I think what we found, when you boil it down to it, it comes down to those hard-to-measure intangible benefits of studio life, campus life, office life, that all have just gone missing. And why did they go missing? Dispersed working, dispersed studying, it happened overnight. We moved the planet, literally, it felt like in days, from as it was to, well, we're just going to make this up. Everybody's going to work out of their living room, out of their, from their kitchen table, out of their bedroom. And what didn't happen, obviously, in this incredible rush is there was no time and no thought put in designing for those intangibles. They simply went missing. And while you're looking already at some of these four concepts that clearly have gone missing, the one above all of that has gone missing is the concept of fun. Like, how fun was it to be together in the office, to be on campus? Those places were not just places to study or places to work, right? They were places for sharing moments of camaraderie, for trials, for failures, for triumphs, for a pursuit often of hopefully a shared mission, a reason why we get out of bed every morning. So the importance of fun at work, fun on campus, should absolutely never be underestimated. And beyond fun, it's concepts like mentorship. When you look at people being in the workplace, being maybe a young new professional, 70% of the learning comes through on-the-job, training on-the-job learning. 10% comes from actual training courses, and 20%, and often depending on who you work with, what the culture, what the environment is, actually comes from observation and from discussing and really living and understanding how a role model thinks, acts, models behavior, and displays, this is how I would approach this problem. And at the same time, the best role models are those that are also really adopting the concept of reverse mentoring. So mentorship as a concept was really hard to replicate, and it had gone missing. Validation is another one. Email relationships are, they can be, I have people who write 2-word emails. I'm sometimes trying to figure out, what does that client actually mean with just 2 words? So email relationships are wonderful, but they're nothing compared to in-person relationships. Team dynamics, of course, we have put everything possible into recreating or creating new forms of team dynamics over the last few years. But creative teams that, share a vibe that comes from familiarity, that comes from, those projects that you've won, those projects that you've pushed together, it's that vibe that sparks ideas, and that vibe and those team dynamics have been different. Innovation, I think studies that I've looked at, the rate of innovation certainly has continued, but it's slowed down. And then if I go beyond that, who has been losing out the most because we rushed into this? We had to rush into this. There was no time for designing for those intangibles. The generation since March 2020 that either joined campus or joined work life. I think 43% of our employees in the last, of our total employees have joined remotely, have joined since 2020. That's an entirely new experience for them. And one of our big jobs is we have to work really hard to get fun back for them. Beyond that, other things that are missing are things like best friend at work. Is that called the best friend on Teams? They all always disappear. Or best friend at college. There's an extraordinary stat from Microsoft that there's an extremely high correlation between best friend at work and being happy at work. So happiness at work has been on an extreme downturn because that best friend at work has just been missing. But then at the same time, the other side of that stat in that report was when you actually talk to employees, 82% of them say, I'm actually really, really productive and happy at home. But only 12% of managers believe that. 82% are saying, I'm super productive and I'm having a good time. I feel like I'm doing what I love and I'm growing in that, but only 12% of managers believe that. That's a shocking, massive, huge gap in expectations. And should I say a big gap in trust? So we think that this entire hybrid model of working absolutely needs a redesign. Intangibles like fun, it has to be a must-have. Fun can't just be, a nice-to-have. And we have to focus on earning people's commute anywhere in the world, but I especially imagine, you have to work hard to earn the commute of people in a city like Los Angeles. So there's a few things that we are recommending is that, I was for many years inspired and intrigued by Elon Musk, but don't maybe take an approach that sort of like is non-negotiable, a very strong directive approach, but at the same time also don't take an incredible democratic, let's all hug each other, let's all hold hands, and we'll just work this out. It's very clear in our research that people actually want guidance. The chief human resources officer of a very large global enterprise told us this rather surprising story that their approach as the pandemic started to ease up was completely hands-off. Let every employee, let every team lead figure it out on their own. And guess what happened? It didn't quite work out. And the group that raised their voice the loudest was actually Generation C. They very, very clearly said, no. Actually, I want some guidance. I want some direction. Please articulate clarity of purpose. Why are we here? What are we doing? Be clear about the ambition on this new journey that you as a company have, and please be really, really clear what you expect us to do in there. We're ready to contribute and to lean in, but we want some level of guidance. So in many ways, this means as we redesign and as we shape hybrid, which is not going away in its next chapter, we have to figure out what this will do for relationships. We have to look at how this will help with career enrichment, especially, for the younger generation. And, we have to take an entirely new approach to designing workplaces, especially for those intangibles that have gone missing. I said we have to earn people's commute. We have to really focus on a clear purpose. There is no point in going to offices when those same colleagues spend the entire day on Teams meetings. They could have done that at home. And designing spaces is absolutely key in this next journey. So the fourth trend, OK creativity, is all about generative AI, and it's focusing on the impact of this newfound creativity, which is really possibly in the hands of the general population. I mean, the speed at which this wave has built up is incredible. Many people are referring to it as, is this artificial intelligence's iPhone moment? Is this similar to what happened in 2007 when Steve Jobs introduced the first iPhone, which was a huge accelerator to everything that has happened since then, be it in the complete digital landscape or turning mobile phones into remote controls of our life? Clearly, it's day one, but 2007 seems so close. It's 16 years ago. So let's fast forward 16 years. There's a lot that can happen, and a lot that especially you, designers, creatives, can influence where that journey is going. And then if we combine that with the recent sort of like huge focus on ChatGPT, there's obviously an incredible amount of change. How many here in the room have played with or experimented with Midjourney? Stable Diffusion? Who has written their most recent letter in Italian using ChatGPT? Excellent. Even that. So why do I ask these questions? Because last summer I mentioned at the beginning, 62 studios. Where does all of the content for these trends come from? It's those 2,500 thinkers, makers, doers, bright, ambitious designers. They collect these signals. We have a wonderful template, the trends poster, that brings all of this together. Never before did happen what happened last summer. More than 50% of the input that came back was actually created with Mid-Journey. Nobody referred to Mid-Journey as a trend in itself, but more than 30 teams produced content where they used Mid-Journey as a tool to communicate the signals that they were seeing, to communicate their message. And while we, of course, focused on the content overall, that in itself, to us, started to signal a trend. That's August last year. By the time we move into September, we're deeply immersed in the room of the size, doing pattern recognition. Meantime, Stable Diffusion launched. November, ChatGPT is starting to gain momentum. People are paying attention to it. We, luckily, otherwise this report would be so outdated, pushed back the freeze deadline back a couple of weeks, and we got it in. But this is sort of like one of these examples. Things were brewing slowly for a long time, and then suddenly it just became a hockey stick. And this really happened in less than 3 months. And a big accelerator to that is also the fact that the creators have taken very much an open source mindset to it. So we are dubbing this, I think you are, some of you are probably referring to this as neural creativity. And, you know, with the introduction of, we've covered some topics on images, but with the introduction of ChatGPT, artificial intelligence is now also helping us to create language, to create translations, to create copy in a different tone of voice. I mean, when was that at our fingertips? Let me take a side note on that. If we think back to the early days of search, and I'll probably forget some of the search brands, but you know, we had Alta Vista, we had Yahoo, we had Google. Please? You had GoTo. There was a plethora of them, and then suddenly it seemed like the only show in town became Google. Bing, approximately, Microsoft's Bing search engine controls around 3% of the global search market. So January, they host a very well-attended news event and talk about the role that ChatGPT and OpenAI will play in their search platform, and it gains a lot of attention. Then a week ago, Kevin Roos, tech journalist in the New York Times, writes one article and writes the second article. The second article is a verbatim transcript of 2 hours that he spent in dialogue with, as it turns out, ChatGPT has a name. Sydney, thank you. Spends 2 hours with her, and those of you who have read that knows where this story ends. Others, please search for it. But, you know, Sydney, she ends up in, I guess we could call it hallucinations at the end. She tries to convince Kevin that he should leave his wife because he's actually in love with Sydney. And then it takes even darker turns because Sydney thinks she's trapped inside of the search engine and she actually really wants to get out. Entertaining, but also, I mean, there's a lot behind this. Now, in 1 week, from fandom to we're taking the heat off Sydney, we're reducing her exposure. Nobody's going to interact with her for 2 hours. I think it's reduced to about 5 minutes because the large language model needs to continue to learn and to be trained. But the reason why I'm mentioning this is, I mean, this is an incredible, we are living right now, I think, through, in an extremely compressed period of time, through innovation at speed that I don't believe I've been part of over the last 20 years. And that then leads me to also, wonder, what does this mean actually for creativity? Some people get extremely anxious. This feels unstable again. Will this replace creativity? Will this displace jobs? Well, it might, or it might not. It's what we make out of this moment. When you look at the relationship between creativity and technology, technology has always been there. Michelangelo used technology. Van Gogh used technology. Ansel Adams used technology. It's always been a tool for creation and part of the creative process. If I look at photography, the idea, the creativity, the intent, that's the human input. The camera was the tool. The camera is the technology for taking that image. And the creative output is, in a way, the interaction, the interplay, the symbiosis between human and the tool. So in many ways, we are barely on day one. We have new creative tools in our creative toolbox. And yes, everybody can use them, just like everybody was able to use a pencil, maybe use a Mac, use a camera. I think as designers, you will and we will master these tools and actually elevate the potential of what we're currently seeing through that focus on craft and, at the end of the day, human ingenuity. Creativity evolves culture, and once again, and just at incredible speed and intensity, that technology is our co-pilot. And, if you're in the driver's seat, it's a co-pilot. So the questions, I think, to come to terms with is also, where do you want to use this kind of technology? In the sort of like 0 to 1, in that first set of steps, can it be an accelerator? Can it offer the initial spark? Do we choose to start with a blank canvas? Or do we choose to start with a filled canvas? Is the first set of ideas, the concepts, the words that you put to paper or that you put into these various tools, and that becomes your starting point? Is it a friend or is it a competitor? The outputs at the end of the day are as good as the input. And the outputs will become even better from those who understand how the platforms are written and who also pay attention to the potential biases that are built into those platforms and circumvent those as well. We're certainly, in my mind, at a pivot point, because artificial intelligence has been around us and has been with us for decades. And in the more recent past, it was everywhere, but it was just much more invisible inside of large enterprises where it was helping with, customer service, with automation tasks. And now, boom, right? Slowly and then suddenly, it's just highly visible and it's available everywhere, which really makes this, in my mind, super, super interesting times. Experimentation with technology and the adoption is just happening at such a speed that the truth is most companies actually are having a really, really hard time to keep up with it. At the same time this is happening, clients from around the world in every possible industry are calling us, are calling many agencies and firms. What are we supposed to do with it? What's the legal situation? What's the copyright situation? What's the next version? And the answer is, we are all living in this right now. And if I now take sort of like a leap back to brands, brands also are going to have to work out how to still stand out of a sea of sameness, how to make an impact in a world where we probably will see a huge wave of newly, user-generated content of a quality that is very different than in the first eras of user-generated content. Brands will have to transition their teams to new content strategies. Are we producing less? Are we producing more? How will we differentiate? And how will we compete and stand out from user-generated content? They'll have to train, they'll have to upskill their talent and their agencies. So really, really interesting times. But at the same time, which also I think brings us back to this place, the attention to craft and the time that if you're a student here right now, that you have to explore to not just, use the tool, but really excel beyond what it seems to be able to do at its surface is what will differentiate, the excellent from the average. That brings me to signed, sealed, delivered. Is that how it goes? The fifth and the last trend. And, while this trend is about something as niche or maybe still as obscure as digital wallets, we actually believe this, even more so than the other four trends, is an incredible opportunity for design. It's a design trend which is influenced by what Web3 is enabling, what tokenization is enabling, but as the subhead says, it's a question of adoption. Will people actually adopt it? Will they understand? And will we be successful in really creating clarity? It's a design moment because once again, as designers, one of our first jobs is to really understand people, understand their fears, understand their concerns, understand the technology, understand its limitations, and then do what we do best, actually create transparency, create understanding, and help, paving maybe the next path into the next chapter of where we are and this digital future. This trend is at the end of the day about a crisis around digital identity. The truth is, the status quo of how our personal information is used or is misused, it's long overdue for change. And the exciting opportunity in this trend that we see is that people actually may, for the first time, have a chance to regain control over their personal information through these digital wallets, which contain tokens to represent your identity, maybe to represent your payment methods, maybe to represent loyalty cards, and much, much more. The crucial difference is, if we get this right, that it's us, it's you, who can decide how much you want to share, and it's not the other way around. There's even good news in this for brands. The last few years, there's been sort of like this fear building up more and more for brands that we will lose all of the data that we've built up over the years that are essentially part of being a successful brand, offline and online. The opportunity might actually be that third-party data will be able to be replaced with first-party data. The devil is obviously in the details for how we design value concepts, the exchange between what a brand has to offer and what I, as a human, as a consumer, want to offer, and if I actually trust that this time, my personal data will be really, really safe. So defining how to ensure adoption is certainly not going to be trivial, and we are living this right now. Nobody has the answers yet, but everybody is experimenting. So I think, where I come from, I do believe that privacy should be a fundamental right, and it is a fundamental right. But when we look online today, there's an incredible lack of transparency around how our data is used by companies, and that has led, again, to a huge decrease in trust when I think about all of the pain points when it comes to a consumer, when it comes to a user experience, think about cookies and think about the endless retargeting that they lead to. Some of you know this, I'm a passionate cyclist. I decided last summer it's time for a new road bike. I did my research, I talked to a lot of friends, I talked to all of the people that I trust. I've long purchased a bike, but the interweb still believes I'm in the market and I can't get rid of all the retargeting that I'm getting. Well, why? Because also the next layer down are ad networks, right? Which store a ton of data about us. They store data about my medical history. They store data about our sexual orientation. They store data maybe about your political affiliation. And that's, again, the bad part. All too often, it might not even be anonymized. Cookie preferences. Oh, my God, my favorite topic. That annoying pop-up. It's just a nuisance, right? New sites that you go to, every time the same effort of onboarding. On average, people have, hopefully, in a password manager, more than 100 passwords and possibly usernames. So when you step back and you look at this from a simplicity mindset, it's an insane mental burden. It's huge. It's a mess. And that's just only on the consumer side. If I then switch to the other side again and look at the challenges that brands are facing, Google will eventually, they said it's going to happen 2023, it'll probably still take a while, they will eventually phase out the role that third-party cookies are playing. In 2021, 2 years ago, 83% of marketers said they entirely rely on them as part of their digital marketing strategy. This time, 1 year ago, February 22, a G2 article stated that 44% of marketers said, we're not prepared for change, but we need to quintuple the amount of money we are spending in order to hit the same goals as the year before. So then you add this topic around tokens and tokenization to it. So what are tokens really? And I'm not an expert on it, but I read enough about it that for me, actually stepping away from digital, the simplest way to think about a token is everybody has their coat. But if we had a coat check outside and you arrived here this evening, you would take off your coat, you will give it to the coat check, you would get a piece of paper with a number on it. That paper slip and that number is the same number on the paper slip that's on the hanger. And suddenly, that paper slip becomes a token that represents who you are and what you own. That paper slip, is a token. Now, if you go beyond that code check, tokens of life will get soon digitized as well, and we can house them in these wallets on a blockchain. That is tokenization, maybe in a simple way explained. And today's tokens of life, they can actually range from something really important to something useful or to something permanent or very, very short time. It can prove who a person is, right? It could hold my birth certificate, my passport, my citizenship card. And it can serve a really, really critical purpose, like my driver's license, maybe my medical records, my employee ID, or the deed to a home. So what these digital Web3 wallets, if we get it right, could do, they can serve two major functions. They can allow people to manage all of their owned digital assets, currencies and tokens in one place, and it would enable us to control accessibility to other apps that are also using a blockchain. So what's next? I think if we get this right, what we need to see is a full shift in those ecosystems in the years ahead as blockchain as a technology will continue to mature and will begin, if we get it right, to transform people's lives online. It's a huge opportunity and obviously also a challenge. It's a challenge technologically, but I think the even bigger one will be the human challenge because we actually don't really like change. What we need to get right is we need to show people that, the control we can take over their data, the control we can take to regain control of our data is actually worth the time to put in. That's the human challenge. And if I think about how much effort I, or probably many of us here in the room, will put into when that cookie preference pop-up shows up, most of us probably hit accept all. Hopefully some of you don't. But why? Because we have not done a very, very good job of making it easy, and we have not done a great job of explaining really the value around dealing with this. Now, it will also be important to make it actually easy to get a hold of these tokens and end up using them in day-to-day transactions. And the truth is, as far as we can see right now, that is not entirely clear yet how this will happen and how this especially will happen at scale. But, the next opportunity or challenge here is our job as communicators and designers can be to explain that a digital wallet is much, much more than just payments and points, right? We have to expand people's mental model, and that may actually start with the very words that we're using for it. Maybe it's not called a wallet. And then lastly, I think we have to also help people understand the concept of permission levels they want to grant to anybody, to businesses, and what those mean. So the amazing thing is, the technology, once again, is here. The time is ours right now. The opportunity is to actually plan for it and really enable the right kind of human impact that we want to have from it. And even marketing organizations who are terrified around loyalty and how they will understand their current customers and their future customers in a world post third-party cookies, for them, these wallets and the role that tokens can play to really understand those who grant understanding can be actually a very, very clear pathway into the future. So those were, or are, the 2023 trends. I started out with control and power. I hope throughout you started to see why that emerged for us as the overall theme. We talked about instability and our very, very human reaction to instability. We touched on tokenization and loyalty, on the sort of like flight from big platforms to niche platforms and deeper communities. All of the challenges around return to work, return to campus. The exciting times that artificial intelligence and creativity together will create, and the role of digital wallets and personal data. All of them are control issues, and the shifts in these will ultimately result in where power resides. And I think that shift of power and the role that control will have is super, super interesting, and it is what will probably define a lot of the thinking and a lot of the doing over the next 1 to 3 years, maybe 5. It's 5 trends. We have a pretty good track record over those last 15 years that on average, 3 to 4 of them are well-timed. One of them tends to be a little bit too far out. I'm not going to take a guess right now. We have actually never missed something. We just maybe timed it a little bit too early. So that's it. 5 trends. I hope you take something out of it. I thank again all of you for coming out on this cold, snowy Southern California Thursday. Thank you.